I hear in you is talking. It's really being an authentic learner. Like, be very honest about what is and isn't working.
Yeah.
And learn from people who are seeing it differently. So, say more about that. Like, what are you noticing? You're working with pastors all over the country.
Well, I think what you just said is really key. So, without getting too critiquey, one of my great griefs over most of the American church is the almost appalling level of dishonesty. And honestly, I think this is a bit worse in the charismatic stream of the church than it is in the rest of the church. So, John Wellwood, the psychologist, coined that phrase spiritual bypassing. And he was actually, he worked directly with Buddhists, but it's just as true of Christians, in particular, those of us in the charismatic stream. And by spiritual bypassing, he meant an attempt to use spiritual words, language, practices, and experiences to sidestep kind of the painful work of facing unresolved emotional issues, unfinished developmental tasks, wounds from your family of origin, relational patterns with your parents, stuff in your shadow. My therapist said to me once, denial is the most effective and most common of all coping strategies for pain. And we followers of Jesus, in particular we pastors, have this horrific temptation where we can spiritualize our denial as faith. And often the lines get blurry between what's like faith, hope, and love, the theological virtues, and what's just denial and fear of pain. And it's not always crystal clear, and whatever we don't face, I think David Benner, his line was Freud, he's a psychologist, I think he said Sigmund Freud was wrong about pretty much everything, but he was right that whatever we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, we give the most power. So this is where, ironically, the leaders that don't want to face or talk about their father wound, their shadow, their compulsion, the way their deepest fear, their deep, question or doubt, because they want to, stay full of faith or hope. Ironically, you just give those dark aspects of your life more power, not less power. You suppress them, and actually they begin to then root and dig into the soil of your life, that's why confession is so powerful. It's why we have to get to confession before the sin, just when we're still at the level of temptation. Because if I don't do confession with you, but if I confess to my dear friend that we attempt to do once a week, I did it to him 2 days ago. I'd not actually done anything, but I knew I was going to be in a situation where I would be tempted to do something. And I had to call him ahead of time. Hey, I'm going into the situation. I'm not in the situation a lot. This is going to be, if nothing else, my mind is going to go here, even if I don't actually go there with my body. And I just want you to know that. And just him knowing there's a lot, it doesn't defang it totally, but there is a significant loss of oomph that temptation has, just because it's come out of the shadow into the light. So I think the application to this conversation is, if we could be more honest about both what is working and what is not working, then we would have such a cleaner slate to really build the future church off of. When you create a pride position, you then create a shame position. So if all we do is tell the beautiful stories of healing, this, with the healing stories, you can't just tell the stories of healing. You have to also tell the stories of, I prayed for this person and they died. Otherwise, you create a shame position, and then a whole bunch of people just stop praying for healing or have a crisis of faith. You have to talk about both, and you have to find a way to lift the horizon of possibility and foster through our preaching and leadership genuine hope and faith, and what I would call spiritual realism. You have to name the reality. I think this is one of the primary jobs of pastors. We should be almost like novelists. If you just to nerd out even more, I love to read literature. One of the reasons I read literature is because I learn how to pastor, I learn about the human soul, because novelists have this uncanny ability. They could talk about anything, walking your dog to the park, or parenting, or your eldest kid going away to college. And they just have this way of articulating it that it's like fuzzy and emotional and weird and gut, and you can't quite, and then they put it into a sentence. And you're like, yeah, that's what it feels like to have your kid go away to school. That's what it feels like to be in this kind of a marriage. That's what it feels like to have this kind of a job. And suddenly you're able to then begin to integrate to your life. So I think if we're more honest, like for the first time in my whole life, and not whole life, for the first time since I was 19, I'm not on staff at a church right now. Involved in a church, I teach at a church still, but for this season, I'm running a nonprofit and we're still in startup mode. So I'm not on staff at the church. I'm not an elder at the church. I come in and teach 8 times a year, and the rest of the year I attend. And I took a whole year and a half off preaching and just attended a church with our mentors. And it has been brutal.
I saw that going differently.
But I wish that every professional pastor could have the experience of attending the church. In fact, I even had the privilege of attending the church that I pastored for almost 20 years, for about 6 months before we moved away. And it was very difficult to do that. And I learned so much being on the other end, where now my ego's not tied up in this. My income's not tied up in this. My sense of self-worth is no longer tied up in this. And it wasn't like I lost my faith or blew up the church, but I definitely saw it with a different lens. And I definitely realized, oh, some of the things that I thought were so great are kind of like, And other things that I was kind of like, yeah, we should do that. Or like, no, this is really, really, really important. That's spiritual realism. I'm learning, I'm getting better lens on reality. So the temptation for me is just to fight my way back to that model where I feel safe and I know how to do church that way, rather than to, all right, I have new data now. What can I do with this? How could I reimagine as we move forward in community? What could I do differently? And really, this is why I think, it sounds dangerous to say this, but humility is the foundation of the spiritual life. That's why I cheat. And I'm not saying that, therefore I'm so humble. And that's not what I'm saying. God knows the pride that is lurking just below the surface of my heart and at the top at times. But Jesus made blessed are the poor in spirit the first beatitude, I think, on purpose. And there's a whole case to be made at an exegetical level that he is saying by beginning the Sermon on the Mount with the statement, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. There's one interpretation that is, he is saying spiritual poverty, or just in layman's terms, humility, is the foundation of all spiritual formation and all Christian spirituality. That is the ground on which we stand. And if we're not willing to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, then we limit God's capacity to lift us up to do what he would have us do.